Spencer, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah, so we just did a podcast. I had the opportunity to be on your podcast, Lessons in Leverage, which was super fun. Getting into the nuances of really being able to identify mindset or different components that help entrepreneurs and other individuals to, really do their best work and propel forward. So we can link back to that. But today we're going to get a little bit more into what you guys do over at solve.cloud. So, looking forward to hearing more about Salesforce and specifically what you do on the Salesforce component for financial services companies. So, before we get into all that and the nitty-gritty there, I'm going to hand it over to you. Tell me a little bit about your background. How did you get into the space? All that.
Sure, yeah. Well, I started being an entrepreneur when I was a kid and was mowing lawns and doing door-to-door sales and had a lot of interesting experiences that got me kind of thinking about, wanting to build a business and watched my dad spend a lot of years in really safe, quote unquote, safe career moves. And then towards the end of his career, started a business and saw how that impacted our life. And so I knew at some point I wanted to create, a business. And so as I was going through college and getting a master's in information systems management, I was looking for a role where I could really acquire a lot of skills, build high value relationships. And I found myself at a firm called Chiasma, which is German for intersection. It was kind of the intersection of business and technology was their
Yeah.
thing. And so we did a ton of Salesforce consulting. That was the primary focus of the business at the time. And so as I
Mhm.
was developing those skills, I realized like this is something that I'm sure I can build on my own. And so about 6 years ago, I started Solved, and we were able to build the company from there. Now we have about 62 consultants worldwide, and
Oh,
have grown
smokes.
quite a bit. So it's been
Amazing. Okay, so you basically came from this previous experience and then you got this company going. What was the gap in the market that you saw that to be able to get this business running?
Well, there's a couple of things with that. I mean, the first was just that the market was growing so fast. So part of it was just a
Mhm.
demand issue where even an average partner in our space when I started this company was growing at like 23% a year.
Oh my gosh,
And so
which is significant.
knowing that that's the average for that market,
Yeah.
that was a market I really thought would be smart to start a business in because I thought I could be above average. And so we grew, triple figures every year for the first 3, 4 years, way outpacing that average. Uh,
Right.
but that was the first element was just seeing such a good market opportunity. The second component was the firm I was working at got acquired by an accounting firm, and we went from this like fast-paced, high-tech, results-oriented entrepreneurship culture to
Right.
very bureaucratic, slow, heavy, expensive type
Right.
process. So
Right.
that shift didn't wasn't super comfortable for me, and I wanted to go back to doing what we were doing before for clients. And so I saw an ability to take everything I learned from operating these multi-million dollar projects and
Right.
bring that expertise down to a much faster pace and affordable offering for the small and mid-sized customers that I wanted to go back to working with.
Okay, so tell me about that. Are you guys exclusively in financial services or do you work
Not
across?
exclusively. So when we first started, I would take anyone who had Salesforce who
Yeah.
knew
Yeah.
Salesforce because you're just trying to get traction. But
Right.
a couple years in, COVID happened, and
Yes.
COVID happened. I looked at our pipeline and I realized that all of our pipeline dried up, and many of our projects went on hold, at least
Hmm.
during the initial fear of
Right.
COVID, except for my clients that were either SaaS, like high tech SaaS businesses, and my clients that
Uh-huh.
were financial services companies. Both those businesses were actually increasing their spend with us. And I was
Mhm.
like, well, that's interesting. And so I told my team, we're going to focus explicitly on these two areas to try to get
Mhm.
through COVID. So originally it was kind of a specialization out of necessity to try
Right.
to profit from and succeed during COVID. And
Right.
sure enough, actually, what happened was as stimulus money and all the different things happened, tech firms started spending a ton with us and their growth really skyrocketed. So that was good.
Yeah.
And financial services also saw a really big, increase in revenues and things. You could say it was due to inflation and other market economics, but
Right.
both of those ended up being really strong markets to ride. And so, as we did that, we developed this deep expertise in those two industries.
Okay. And can you tell us, so I heard SaaS within also just financial services kind of realm. Are you working with like wealth management firms? Is it payroll? Like who, or there's a specific kind of deeper target there?
Yeah, so in the financial services space, we do touch on a lot of different areas, but probably about 50 to 60% of our financial services customers are RIAs and wealth management firms. So we do a
Mhm.
lot with wealth management. But then the rest is a mix of things, everything from, community,
Yeah.
credit unions to private equity, venture capital.
Yep.
We've done all sorts of other, REITs, different things on the fringe,
Yep.
um, but really we do a lot in that wealth management space.
Okay. Yes. So we're definitely speaking the same world because we do a lot in that world as well. So, tell me a little bit more when folks are coming to you guys, what kind of needs do they have? Like, is it just like a hot mess in Salesforce? Have they even started Salesforce? Are they kind of like shopping around? Do they usually have an ops person? Like, kind of what's the state? Like, is there a status, status quo that these companies are coming to you with?
Um, there's a pretty wide range of circumstances people come to
Yeah.
us with. The most common way that we get introduced to a customer is actually when they're talking to Salesforce. So a lot of the companies that we work with, the start of our relationship, we've built up such a strong reputation with Salesforce that their
Hmm.
reps, when they have these different wealth management firms, they'll bring them to us and say, "Hey, here's a firm that specializes that can help you with your
Right.
evaluations." Often they're sort of mid CRM evaluation.
Right.
And so that's the most common sort of link between all of these customers that come into our realm. Some of them come to us because they've had trouble, their implementation didn't go the way they wanted,
Yeah.
have frustrations with their CRM, so they'll come to us from that. But most common is that they're evaluating either changing from something like Redtail or,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
the big players out there,
Yeah. Wealth
or
box
they're
or
just
yep.
they might be coming from like a just nothing, like spreadsheets, or even we have had some
Hmm.
that are coming from paper processes and they're just now
Wow.
digitizing their business.
Okay.
So one of those backgrounds leads to this evaluation of a CRM. They get in
Right.
conversation with Salesforce. Salesforce loops us in, and so
Yep.
then we're trying to help them understand what's the cost of implementation, what is the
Right.
complexity, what do we do in the first phase versus not, how are they going to manage it long term, what value does it offer to their business. And so there's a wide range of things, but some of the common themes in that are they need a way, obviously, to track their customers. They
Yep.
usually want some form of custodial integration. They usually
Hmm.
want There's a lot of other possible integrations they're considering that they got to price
Hmm.
out and see if there's really a high ROI on that or not.
Hmm.
And then there's obviously all of the desire is around more efficiency, generally
Hmm.
speaking, that they want to be able to better manage these relationships with the customer,
Yep.
have it be so paper heavy or manual process heavy, but still provide a really exceptional experience to their customers, stay on top of their annual reviews, get all the documents out. So there's often a lot of doc gen type requirements or
Yeah.
different forms requirements.
Yep.
So those are kind of the common themes we see.
Okay, so with that, I want to go into this customer experience component a little bit more because that's so critical to this demographic, right? It's being able to, really have those well-nurtured relationships, staying top of mind in an authentic way. And I feel like a CRM, had several conversations recently with folks about how CRMs can do just that. So what kind of things are you seeing that are working well from like checks and balances or things that you're implementing on your side that would help to kind of nurture those relationships? Are you like wireframing kind of workflows? Are they handing them off to you? What kind of things are you say like if you could say to a wealth management firm, like, here are the top three things to consider when you're building out your CRM that are going to impact your actual customer service, what would you say?
That's a good question. A few that come to mind. The number one thing that came to my mind as you were asking that question is just the tool will not change your business. So,
Yes, totally.
tools are tools. If you give, let's say you got a dirt digging business and you've been using a shovel for years and you're really
Yeah.
great with a shovel. If I just give you a backhoe, you're probably going to kill somebody.
Yep.
So a backhoe moves dirt way better than a shovel does,
Yep.
but that's a big change for your business. And so
Hmm.
knowing, especially if you're coming from paper processes, but
Hmm.
the more antiquated your current processes are, you need to be realistic about the fact this is a very significant impact to your business. It meaning change management,
Hmm.
training,
Hmm.
actually making sure your processes make sense before you try to automate things. Sometimes
Yep.
customers really try to make the jump from like manual to highly automated, and there's a lot of risks that are fraught around that we could talk
Yes.
through. So there's some big pitfalls there where people will look at the tool and go, "Oh, good, this is the world class. It's the top tool in CRM across all
Right, right,
industries."
right.
So for sure, it's just going to work out of the box. It's going to be great, and it's going to save us. It's going to solve our problems. It's not.
Yep.
Salesforce's job is to sell you on the ways that could solve your problems.
Mhm.
Our job is to support you in actually helping it get to the point that it's solving those
Solving
problems.
the problems. Yep.
But it can't replace strong vision and leadership internal to the company.
Yep.
You can't do it without strong change management. And you've got
Mhm.
to really be process first and make sure, to your point, that you start with a clear understanding of the current business processes, the
Mhm.
future state of what those business processes are going to look like as you incorporate the new tools, and then you bridge that gap. And that's something we do on all our projects is we start with a current state analysis and map
Yeah.
out what the future state's going to look like. And some people will ask us, like, oh, but why are we wasting time on this? We just want to go to the way we're going to do it in the future. And the
Right,
problem
right,
is,
right.
if we don't know how you're doing it today, then things get missed. So if you just
Yep.
jump to this great future, all of a sudden you're like, wait, Sally used to manually send a birthday card to these people or
Yeah.
happy anniversary card. That was nowhere in the diagram, and now it's not happening, and now our customers don't feel valued, right?
Yep.
So
Yeah.
that's the first element: is the tool is not your savior; it is a tool. And it
Mhm.
comes with all of the challenges, complexity, difficulty, change management that we just talked about. But it can be a massive lever in terms of creating leverage for your business, accelerating outcomes, being more efficient long term. But if
Right.
you have a clear vision on that, I think some firms, especially if you haven't been tech forward in the past, and the reality of financial services, it tends to be more of a laggard market in
Mhm.
terms of tech. I think that's the first expectation I would really set around this.
Yep. So it's not necessarily like, okay, here are like three things you should consider. It's more like there needs to be a whole needs analysis to be able to say where are you at and what are the key things that are critical to your business. And then we build around that. So we basically prioritize, make a timeline, so on and so forth. So,
Certainly. Yeah.
okay.
And then as we look at the transition from whatever your current processes are into your new CRM,
Yeah.
sort of second piece of advice I would give around this is don't try to do it all at once. Because it's such a significant change, our goal and our philosophy is to really simplify down to the smallest possible project that has an ROI.
Yep.
So, if you get too small, there's no ROI on it. But the second we can get the project up to a level of complexity that provides the ROI that we need,
Hmm.
that's what we want to try to limit our scope.
Hmm.
And people can get so carried away with, well, if this is possible and all these other things are possible, let's go, go, go. Especially entrepreneurs, these guys who have built their own business, who built these firms and have strong visions and are excited to move into the digital age. We want you to slow down and say, look, let's just get a base hit. Let's do something that's a really good transition because there's already enough chaos around transitioning systems. And
Hmm.
then once that's stable, then let's add on. Yes, there's a long-term roadmap here of ways you can drive additional efficiency, more integrations, more customer
Right.
value.
Right.
But
Right.
just the second piece of advice is be really disciplined about keeping that scope as small as possible to start with a
Hmm.
clear idea of what the return is that you're looking for.
Hmm.
Get to that return and then layer on the additional levels.
Hmm. So, moving slowly. Don't expect this to be a change overnight.
Yes,
Okay,
100%.
can you talk a little bit more about just the nuances of Salesforce and specifically as it relates to the financial services space? Is there a specific Salesforce like version? Are there things to be aware of for compliance? Are there things that, a firm should be asking or individuals should be asking if they're thinking about using this platform, or maybe they're like, I don't know, uh,
Yes,
to be
there's a lot.
aware of? Yes.
Yeah, there's a lot to be aware of on this front. So a couple things I would point out right off the bat. Salesforce is both a software, or actually I should say they sell many softwares,
Right, right,
cloud-based
right.
softwares, and it is a platform on which you can build. And not
Hmm.
only can you build, but other companies can build. Now,
Hmm.
here's why that's really important to understand. You can buy Salesforce not from Salesforce. So you can buy what is the platform of Salesforce that
Yeah,
has a custom built solution on it from a
right.
bunch of different companies, including in some cases, for example, Fidelity used to have a version of Salesforce that they would sell you that
Yeah.
came with their setup of integrating.
So interesting. I had no idea. Yeah.
So they don't do that anymore,
Yeah.
and now they just focus on providing the connector.
Right.
But there are several examples of that. So you might hear a firm advertise like, "Oh, we're built on Salesforce, and so
Right.
you're getting our proprietary solution with all the flexibility of Salesforce." It's not
Yeah.
exactly true. Um, so when someone builds on top of Salesforce, you're
Right.
getting a proprietary software with
Right.
only the accounts, contacts, and very base level platform functionality of Salesforce underneath it. And if
Yeah.
in the future you wanted to get additional functionality that Salesforce has out of the box, you'd
Yeah.
have to migrate entirely to core Salesforce, to base Salesforce. So that's a painful realization for people later that if
Mm-hmm.
you start on one of these specialized tools and it's not your long-term solution, you can't
Mm-hmm.
just flip a switch and go and say, well, now I'm just going to do vanilla Salesforce without that. So that's the first thing is you got to know if you're looking at Salesforce or you're looking at providers that build on Salesforce, there's lots of different options. The one most firms need to look at, and it's the most powerful version. I'll talk more about why in a second, but it's financial services cloud from Salesforce. So it means you're buying
Right.
direct from Salesforce and you're
Yep.
buying from their financial services cloud team. You might initially, depending on how you put your information into a web form or you reach out to them, you might end up
Right.
talking to like a core team who's just trying to sell
Right.
you Sales Cloud
Right.
or
Right.
Service Cloud. And they say, oh, this is a great fit for your company. They say that because they get commission on that cloud.
Right.
So
Right.
if you're not talking to a financial services cloud rep, you got to make sure you first and foremost get to a financial services cloud rep that is going to actually look at selling you financial services cloud because that's what's going to give you the most power downstream long term.
What
Because
makes
any
financial
combination,
services? So I just want to understand what's the difference? Like, what are the bells and whistles that this particular version offers versus the other tools?
there's many. I'm just going to call it a few that are really important. So
Yeah.
the first and foremost, they have what's called the householding model, which means that instead of just having account records and contacts, which maps
Right.
to like a B2B sale, where you
Right.
have a company and then you have different people that work at that company. And
Hmm.
then they also have a model that's called person accounts, where you can have just a person as a customer, which maps to a B2C motion.
Hmm.
In financial services cloud, there's sort of this custom hybrid version of that called the
Right.
household model, where you have individuals, but they are
Hmm.
grouped into households. And so
Makes
obviously,
sense.
if I'm trying to work with a family and manage their different investments and their
Right.
future, I got to know I'm sort of B2C, but I'm
Right.
also sort of selling to a group of an entity or group of entities. And in some cases, I might need to keep track of the collection of entities that this person is related to. I might have their
Yeah.
family grouping,
Yep.
their household, but I might also need to keep track of their estate, being like a trust or the
Yep.
business they own. And as I look at these different things, Financial Services Cloud gives a much more robust relationships model to be able
Hmm.
to track all that in a way that's very powerful for financial services firms. So that's the first difference that you really want to be aware of. The second one is
Uh,
they give you a set of automations called
hmm.
Omni Studio. And
Mm.
that's without going down the rabbit hole of that, it's a very powerful tool that allows you to customize your system and integrate your system faster than normal Salesforce
Mm.
and at lower cost. And so it's a really valuable tool that's added onto that license.
Mhm.
The other thing about this is as more and more traction has been made with Financial Services Cloud,
Mhm.
most of the integrations that get pre-built for a firm that is in the financial services space, if they build an integration, your integration has to be compatible with the version of Salesforce you're on.
Mhm. Mhm.
So most of them are going to make it compatible with Financial Services Cloud, not necessarily Sales Cloud. Sometimes it'll do both. Sometimes it'll only be Sales Cloud. We can't control the third-party vendors. But increasingly, what we're seeing in the market is that all the new and latest integrations are being
Yeah.
mapped specifically to Financial Services Cloud. And this advice gets back to a core element that people have to understand about why would you even go to Salesforce in the first place,
Right.
which is it's going to be more complex, it's going to be more costly to set up and more costly to maintain than a Redtail or a Wealthbox or these other
Mhm.
tools. In
Mhm.
fact, if you were to just go one to the other with a very lightweight implementation, you might have even less functionality than those tools at the start.
Mhm.
And that's because Salesforce is a platform. So there's so much power and it's very robust. The reporting
Yes.
is way more powerful. The integrations are way more powerful. That all has to be set up.
Yeah.
And so you're buying the higher complexity tool.
Yep.
And so if there's not an ROI in that, if you just need something simple, I would say that their base functionality is improving over time as they continue. They are constantly releasing new features and making it better. So I think the
Yeah.
base financial services is getting much more competitive head to head with like a Redtail or something.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But you're probably feature a little bit feature light head to head compared to those
Mhm.
tools, and the cost will certainly be higher. So it's harder to justify the ROI head to head at the very entry level.
I
But as
see.
soon as you're looking at some of these other third party integrations and some of the additional functionality you can extend or add on,
Yeah.
that's where Salesforce starts to sail and really become high value for companies long term.
Yep.
And so if you know that that's not where you're going, Salesforce might not be the first fit off the bat.
Makes
But
sense.
but that's where if I'm going to buy a purpose built tool and I
Yep.
look at something that's packaged up and repurposed, like mortgage, I forget off the top of my head the name of it, but there's a really popular mortgage offering for
Uh-huh.
mortgage that is built on top of Salesforce, but
Yep.
again, it's one of those OEM resold tools.
Yep.
That's a really good tool, but it's the equivalent of a Red Tail or anything else. Even though this built on the Salesforce platform and you can customize it more because of that, you'll never be able to flip a switch. So if you ever go to full financial services cloud, that's a whole migration. So
Hmm.
knowing that is really important. Okay, one more thing I want to share on this. I know there's a lot of
Yes.
information, but there's
No, it's all
a
this
lot of
like
distinctions
drinking from
around
the
this that
fire
are
hose. Yes.
okay, so another thing is that there are different tiers. So you have different products, which we just
Uh-huh.
talked about, things like Sales Cloud, Service Cloud, et cetera. But then Salesforce also has something called editions, which are tiers of their offering.
Uh-huh.
And so they have on the financial services cloud, I'd have to go back and check. I don't think they offer a professional edition tier. They might, but if they do, it's more than likely not something most firms are going to want just because their professional edition tends to be pretty lightweight.
Mhm.
Again, maybe if you're comparing head to head with like a Red Tail, but by the time you're making the right choice, which is buying Salesforce for the power and for the automation, for the integration, all these other things, you're going to need the tools to get unlocked at the next tier, which starts at really enterprise is the tier that you're going to start to look at. And then they have unlimited edition above that. That unlocks a bunch more functionality, including a lot of their latest AI functionality sits on that. The most important thing to understand about tiers is what tier you're on is it's going to impact all of your license costs. There's a lot of different licenses you can buy on each of these tiers. So again, this is a very complex purchase. This is why
Right.
companies work with us to make sure they're buying the right thing up front. But when you then look at all your licenses, every license costs more on that higher tier. So
Right.
it's a significant shift in investment, and you cannot move down a tier in the future. So
Hmm.
if you start at enterprise and you want to go to professional, that's an org migration. You're doing a full data migration into a different system to get down into a smaller thing. And the
Hmm.
reason for that is not just because Salesforce are dirt bags and they're trying to take all your money. It's
Right.
because
Right.
once you unlock certain features, you can't unbuild that. And
Makes
so
sense. Yeah.
they once you start building past that, the only way to move back is to do a migration, and that's expensive. Every migration is expensive. It's
Yep.
a huge change management cost. There's data issues in every migration. So knowing that, I would like to reduce the risk of someone coming in and going, oh, you know what, we need to cut costs. Could we just move down a level? You can't. So just know
Right.
that that's a thing. And with that, that's why it's so important to get the right licenses up front and maximize your discounts up front, and then negotiate for discounts at every renewal. So that there's a whole process around that as well that's important to understand. But the short of it is, you want to make sure you get a good discount right from the outset. Financial services as a team, they price it so high. So if you look online at the different pricing, you can just
Right.
ignore that. You need to talk to a rep because
Yep.
generally speaking, at a starting point, I
Right.
don't see any deal on financial services cloud that's not at least 30% off list and sometimes as high as 50 just on like a month end. So
Hmm.
there's a pretty big spread there, because it's what's called a super SKU. It's a
Yeah.
to give you all this functionality we talked about, they
Right.
combine a bunch of other tools. So if a company like me were to buy it and
Right.
use all of its tools, it would be worth its list price of like $300 or $500 a user.
Right.
This is way up there on the like depending on what tier you're at. For enterprise, I think
Right.
it's like
Right. Right.
$300 a user. Most people are not paying that. Most people are paying like
Yeah.
150, 170 a user, which that can scare you off from Salesforce if you don't realize how heavy they discount the financial services space.
Hmm.
I look at their list prices and be like, oh, this isn't even feasible. So just
Yeah.
understand up front, you're probably starting on enterprise edition for most companies. You want to start on financial services cloud, again, this is generic. Your
Right.
situation might be different. So talk to a firm like ours and get some advice. But if you're starting on those two, then list is about 300 a user. You can actually usually get that to 150 to 190, somewhere in there, depending on your use case, the size of your company, how many licenses you buy, all that.
Right, right. Oh my goodness, so helpful too. And so yeah, don't just look at the sticker price.
Yeah.
This is so great. I feel like this is just like a overview of Salesforce, all the different platforms, ins and outs of what you guys see too. Are there any other kind of like final thoughts or takeaways that you feel like would be helpful for someone if they're entertaining working with you guys or even just getting Salesforce to start off with?
Yeah, I think some other just helpful tips is one, get a professional. And what I mean by that is there's a few ways you can do that. First and foremost, you can work with a consulting firm like us that does these implementations all the time. That's a smart move. You can hire someone that does this.
Mhm.
We can talk a little bit about how you would evaluate whether or not that's a strong ROI, et cetera. But I would encourage most firms to understand that when you move to Salesforce specifically, this is true really of all systems, but it's just so especially true of Salesforce that I try to put a lot of attention on it, which is there's a long-term maintenance cost to every system. No
Mhm.
system, even the simplest system, there's a certain amount of administrative overhead that needs to be accounted for. And the more
Mhm.
complex and robust your system, the bigger that need is. And
Mhm.
so if you're going to do a really complex or a really powerful implementation of Salesforce and you're going to get all this value out of it, you're probably going to need either an admin on staff long term. Firms like us have long-term support subscription agreements where you can do it that
Mhm.
way, but you
Mhm.
need to know that this is not a set it and forget it type
I was
thing.
just thinking the
Gonna
exact same thing. Yep.
Yep,
Yep.
there's an initial implementation fee. And then beyond that, you will need help if you want to either optimize the system, just keep it running well. Like it takes effort. So
Mhm.
being realistic about what those costs are. One of the hard things for us is when we're in the sales cycle with Salesforce, they brought us into the deal. And
Right.
the pressure from them is for us to keep our costs as manageable as possible and not scare
Right.
the customer away.
Right.
So by the time we get involved in the deal, they don't want us coming and selling like a year-long, support agreement next to the initial cost because it's going to
Right.
inflate the view of the cost of the customer. They may not pull the trigger.
Right.
So, and that's not to speak bad about Salesforce. They're just trying to be as effective as possible and sell their software.
Yeah.
So with that being understood, we are going to do our best to do that. We also feel like it's in the interest of the customer to do that, to help them
Yep.
make the choice, get them over the hump, and do the high ROI thing, whatever that minimum scope is, it's high ROI. But they need to be aware as a customer that there is, and we say this during the sales process, you need to know that there's a long-term cost. So it's not like
Yeah.
we hide it during the sales process, but we usually there's a certain amount of incentive for us to not be scoping that all out. And
Mhm.
so if as the customer already knows that that's something that they need to be thinking about, they can either ask us for it up front or they can ask us, on the side and just figure out, hey, what is this going to cost? But as a customer, it's something that you have to be aware of. What is the long-term actual maintenance cost? What does it look like to do? Don't just assume that like downstream the XYZ add-ons are just going to be easy. They may or
Yep.
they may. You'd be surprised. Sometimes one of the most valuable things we do for customers, like we go in and flip a switch and it turns something on and it's ready.
Yeah.
Sometimes this little incremental improvement takes $30,000. So it's like there's a wide, depending on what's pre-built, what's not, what your unique circumstances are, you need to get a quote and understand like what is the complexity level to do this, because
Right.
that dramatically changes the rationale of whether or not you should. And that's one of the things we train our consultants on, is to push back on understanding the business value the customer wants so we can actually advise them on whether or not they even should be doing that. Because if they think, oh, this is going to save us 20 hours a week and it's going to be worth, $50,000, $100,000 this year, then great. Even if it costs 10, 20, $50,000, it's a no-brainer for your business. But if it's something that you're only going to get an hour of benefit out and you don't tell that to us and we think it's really valuable, I'm like, oh, it's going to cost this. If you don't realize that up front, then you might start on a project that just has no ROI from the outset.
Yes.
And for two, if you do understand it, but you're inflating your view of how it's going to help your business, we try to push back on that as well. Because like, look, this is maybe not what you think it is. So we try to get always to what is the real business value behind what the customer's doing. And usually that boils down to some combination of they want to accelerate growth, they want to operate more efficiently, they want more visibility into their data and their customers. So when you understand which of those they're trying to get to and how they think that's going to happen, then it's easier to be consultative and help them make the best decisions
Mhm.
along the way.
And so kind of in a nutshell with that whole kind of takeaways, make sure you have a line item that's going to long-term project ongoing support because you're going to need it. So you can
Yeah.
do the high ROI initiative to be able to get you running, but it's likely going to be a long-term investment. So it's almost like hiring a fractional employee, if you will, to be able to just constantly dial and make process improvement. So
Certainly, yeah. And so Salesforce in the past, they're moving a little bit away from this, but in the past, they've done 3 major releases a year. So every time that happens, you need to be going in and looking if there's any critical updates, things like that. Um, but then there's, your vendors. Let's say you set up an integration with a third-party
yep.
vendor, they're going to update their integration. Sometimes you got to go, set that
Change
up.
the yep.
And then if you really want to get the most out of systems, someone needs to be talking to your users on some sort of regularity and understanding what their friction points are, what could be what they're doing, where there could be more value. So there's just a lot of ways that plays out, but there is some amount that should be accounted
The
for.
ongoing. Oh my goodness. Well, Spencer, thanks so much for sharing more about just your background. I feel like I got totally like a download on Salesforce, specifically for the financial services space. It was really good to hear those insights. If folks want to learn more, you can head over to solve.cloud to check out Spencer's company. And thank you again. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.